Hi, and welcome to another devotional thought on Acts. It's certainly interesting reading, isn't it? Today I'm going to review just the last part of chapter 19 and the first part of chapter 20. And in these chapters, we've seen Paul put into action his decision to go to Jerusalem, passing through Macedonia and Achaia, and then eventually on to Rome. God was working out his purposes for Paul. The purpose given to Paul in the commission from Ananias way back in chapter 9, that he, Paul, was God's chosen instrument to proclaim God's name to the Gentiles and their kings. So here we see Paul having quite an impact on the city of Ephesus. People who had practiced sorcery were burning their scrolls, and the word of the Lord spread and grew in power. But not everyone was happy with Paul and what he was saying and doing, especially if it meant they were unable to earn as much money as they had before Paul arrived. So when their daily comforts were threatened, they got upset. One such person was Demetrius, a silversmith. As part of his trade, he made silver shrines of the temple of the Greek goddess Artemis, or Diana, being the Roman equivalent. People would come from a long way to worship Artemis at the temple of Ephesus, and they'd buy these silver models and they'd carry them home with them, like, souvenirs. In fact, this temple was the pride and glory of the city of Ephesus. It was, in fact, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. But now, with many people turning to believe in Jesus, not only could Demetrius's income and comfort lifestyle be affected, but the lifestyle of everyone in the city could be also. So with both their trade and religion in danger, Demetrius and his silver-making mates get angry and run around the city shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Pretty soon the entire city is in an uproar and people are shouting and a riot breaks out and they all become confused. They not even really knowing what is going on. Finally, the city leaders managed to calm everyone down and convince the crowd that Paul and his mates hadn't done anything wrong. The great reputation of the city of Ephesus as the guardian of the temple of the great Artemis still stands. Now that peace is restored, Paul gives some encouragement to the believers in the city, bids them farewell, and heads off on his travels. We're told that he spoke words of encouragement wherever he went, and finally arrived in Troas. We then read that on the first day of the week, the believers met together to break bread. Now, remember, this was a normal working day for these people, and yet, despite their undoubted tiredness and busyness, they gathered together. Why? Because they had an opportunity that was too good to miss. The opportunity to hear from the famous Apostle Paul. We read of the atmosphere in the room with the many lamps flickering and that Paul talks way past midnight. We hear of a young man called Eutychus who's sitting on the windowsill. Now, I'm guessing the reason why he was sitting there was because the room was very full. Certainly our health and safety mindset in New Zealand wouldn't allow someone to do that, and for very good reason, because Eutychus falls asleep and topples out of the window to the ground 3 stories below and is killed. Can you imagine the horror of the congregation? Would certainly distract you from what the preacher was saying, wouldn't it? But Paul, in an amazing miracle, raises Eutychus from the dead, and then after announcing, "Don't be alarmed, he is alive," he continues with the business of the meeting. That is, they broke bread together and listened to the gospel. Paul actually went on preaching right through the night until daylight before leaving, and we read that the believers were greatly comforted. What amazes me in each of these very different stories, and in fact throughout the entire book of Acts, is the dedication and commitment of Paul to the mission he had been given. With Paul, it was always the gospel first. He was blamed for the economic downturn in the city, but the gospel came first. His life was in danger, but telling people about Jesus was still his first priority. And look at his fellow believers. Even their comfort, tiredness, and economic situation were all secondary to the importance of fellowshipping together, being together, breaking bread, and listening to the word of the Lord. I'm very aware that living in New Zealand, we are surrounded by safety and comfort, something we often take for granted. And that, I think, is a real challenge for us. I know it is for me anyway. But having come through lockdown and seeing people all over the world still in lockdown with their health and their livelihood at risk, most of us have come to really appreciate how blessed we are to live in New Zealand. But I wonder, do we really realise the value and privilege that is ours and being able to come together to fellowship and to sit under the teaching and sharing of God's word? It's caused me to ask again of myself, am I prepared to put God's mission ahead of my own comfort or my stable financial situation? Even though everything in our society points to that being the measure of success, are we willing to put the gospel of Jesus first? I wonder if you feel that's a challenge for you as well. You see, for Paul, it was about the gospel mission that mattered the most. He lived to serve God, full stop. And what an impact he's had. And even today, he continues to impact people through the words that he said and the words that he wrote. I'll leave that thought with you. Blessing to you all. May you feel greatly comforted, but also challenged.